What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Touchline Talk Show. As always, before I jump in, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week. Today, kind of a special edition of the show. We are talking all things transfers with this January winter window. Try and say that three times fast. Closing and the way it all played out. Obviously, it's a very dramatic, very interesting window. And so I wanted to dedicate basically the entire show today to talking about some of the biggest moves that have happened and kind of how they play into the rest of the season. So that's what we're going to do today. First segment, we're going to talk about a couple of the transfers. And then second segment, we're going to cover a couple more. So be sure to check out the other video. Be sure to stay tuned in if you don't see the transfer you want to hear about in this first segment, because I very well may get to it later on. Going to start with the biggest news at the end of the window. As it was closing, Enzo Fernandez does end up at Chelsea. This deal gets over the line. And then all of a sudden, Enzo Fernandez, who was not playing in Europe, 8 or so months ago, 8, 9, 10 months ago, is the most expensive player in the history of the Premier League. Enzo Fernandez has played a total of 22 games in the Portuguese League and the Champions League, because Enzo Fernandez just got to Benfica this past summer. And that is where this has to start, is just putting this in perspective and his rise in perspective. And like many things, it's not sort of completely one thing or completely the other. Again, he has played 22 games against what you would consider high-level opposition. He has played in the Champions League. He has done well in the Champions League. Obviously, he performed extraordinarily well at the World Cup. He has not played in a European top 5 league before. And he doesn't have a significant track record of playing in the Champions League for an Ajax or Benfica, right, for season after season, where he's done this for a little while. It's one of the things that made me confident about Erling Haaland is you had, and it's a little bit different, and granted, he also didn't have that much experience, but you had seen him deliver in the Champions League before he even moved to Dortmund. And I guess you could say the same about Enzo Fernandez. And that's why it's not that I'm worried about Enzo Fernandez making the transition to the Premier League and I am worried about him being an incredible failure where he just can't do anything. My concern comes in at the point where Chelsea just broke the Premier League transfer record for a guy whose average goals and assists per 90 production over his short career is comparable to what N'Golo Kante produced in the Premier League last season. Now, that was Kante's most productive season in terms of goals and assists, so I cherry-picked the number a little bit, and I'll admit that. But I will say that again. N'Golo Kante in the Premier League last season is comparable to the goals and assist production you're going to theoretically get from Enzo Fernandez. And by the way, Enzo Fernandez was not doing that in the Premier League. And I am one of the first people who will go to bat for this idea that goals and assists aren't everything, that N'Golo Kante has been the most valuable player on arguably multiple Premier League teams. Certainly that Leicester one. As good as Vardy was, as good as Mahrez was. N'Golo Kante was the most important player on that team. And there have been points where he's been the most important player on Chelsea's team. There's a reason this dude wins wherever he goes. And kind of the winning followed him rather than the other way around. So I'm not somebody who says you can only pay 50, 60, 70, 80 million to go get somebody who's actually going to put the ball in the back of the net or to get the world's next great center back. I do believe you can have that kind of value at this position. But we're not talking about 60, 70, 80 even. We're talking about almost double that. And it just screams Chelsea going to spend money on whoever they can find, whatever exciting names are kind of there, whatever shiny objects Todd Boehly can locate, without a coherent plan. And again, Fernandez is young. Theoretically, you can sell him for more than you bought him for. In theory, that's also asking a lot of him to increase his value from being the most expensive player in the history of the Premier League. It's not that Jack Grealish has been awful at Manchester City, but his value's decreased because he hasn't been great. That's the kind of pressure that Enzo Fernandez is now under. And the other part of this is, of course, the World Cup. And this is where I will go to bat for Enzo Fernandez and go to bat for Chelsea a little bit. Saying that this was only because of the World Cup is not entirely fair. Enzo Fernandez was having a fantastic season for Benfica, a Benfica team that I will once again point out finished atop a Champions League group that included PSG and went toe-to-toe with PSG twice. He was a big part of that. And then he went and did what he did in Qatar at the World Cup. So it was this perfect storm. And this was the whole idea behind kind of my player to watch, young rising star from when I was doing all of my World Cup previews, was exactly what happened to Enzo Fernandez. Who's the guy that can use this tournament, the young player, the rising star who can use that tournament to catapult their career and get that move based off of what they've done at the club level and what they do in that tournament? He's not the only one, but he is the poster boy for it. I just come back to the same questions I have with Chelsea. How are these guys all fitting together? How much better does this actually make the team? Because Manchester United have tried to spend a bunch of money, and it didn't work. And Spurs have tried to spend a lot of money, and it's not working. Because you can't just throw money at the problem. What gets lost in the Manchester City conversation, because Manchester City have so much money, is that Manchester City actually spend their money better than almost every club they're competing with for players. And last few transfer windows haven't gone great, at least so far based on what those signings have done and what the ones who have left have gone on to do for their new clubs. I will acknowledge that. But before that, look at the amount of, Ruben Diaz. Look at what Nathan Ake is turning into. Bernardo Silva, Rodri, Ilkay Gundogan. You can just go down the list. Of all of these players, we're going to get to one of them who's no longer at the club here in a while, but so many of those turned into successes, and those players were really good. And you get Erling Haaland for, half of what Chelsea just paid for Enzo Fernandez. Enzo Fernandez is not Erling Haaland, and never will be, with all due respect to Enzo Fernandez. You cannot just throw money at the problem and expect the problem to go away. Can money help? Sure, but you got to solve the actual issues. And I just haven't seen any reason to believe Chelsea can do that. I think Graham Potter has a chance. I will continue to back Graham Potter. I think he's the right person if somebody's going to be able to fix it. But just throwing a bunch of money on it is not going to get you any closer. And by the way, this is a team that's probably not going to be the Champions League next season. And on the financial fair play thing, I don't want to spend too much time on it. But the one thing I will say is it makes no sense to me how they're able to do this. I think that's where most people are at. And at the same time, if nobody's going to actually hold people accountable to this, if nobody is going to proactively put rules in place to stop the methods Chelsea are using to make this happen, because there is an explanation as to how they at least think they can do this. There is a plan in terms of the financial side of this that has a lot to do with long contracts and stretching things out, which now is starting to get addressed. But only after Chelsea found a way to do it and addressed and found the loophole. It's not Chelsea's problem if nobody's going to step up and stop this. That's on the Premier League, that's on UEFA, whoever you want to target that frustration at. There's just a standard that's been set that we don't take financial fair play very seriously. And so Todd Bowley looked up and said, okay, I'm going to push it to the very edge. And if somebody's going to stop me, then let's see it. Because we can whine about financial fair play all we want. It's just not a big deal. And is it better for the game if it is? Absolutely. But it's the world we're living in, and that's not a Chelsea problem. That's a systemic problem inside the Premier League, inside UEFA, inside the sport. And I'm still very much of the belief it just ultimately... Now, it matters when Chelsea's playing random club X. But when you're talking about the biggest clubs in the world, the ones who are really competing to win a Champions League every season, I just really don't think it matters all that much, the money side of it. Because they're all spending money. It's about how you spend it and how you build your team and whether you're organized or not. There's a reason Manchester City and PSG still haven't won a Champions League. Money does not get you all the way there. And it's the same thing is true of Chelsea.